Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio, I have with me Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Dr. Chalmer is a psychologist who has been working with couples for over 30 years. Through his teaching, consulting, and books, his ideas have helped thousands of couples and their therapists. Together with his wife, Judy, Dr. Chalmer hosts the podcast Couples Therapy in 7 Words. He's the author of 3 books, Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong, and Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Couples Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. Today, we're going to dive into the ideas of betrayal and forgiveness. But before we do that, I've got a couple of warm-up questions for the good doctor. So without further delay, Dr. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
One thing I want to ask that I was thinking about, and because I've discussed this with a bunch of friends, married and otherwise, and people in their lives, and how do you get a reluctant partner or a reluctant anyone to try therapy? Because a lot of people say men, but I've heard many occasions where there is a spouse or a mother or a sister or that also doesn't want to go to therapy. So how do you get a reluctant person in your life to try therapy?
Well, Michael, for the benefit of your viewers and listeners here, I did not plant that question for you, but I could have, because I actually have a video on that very topic, or rather, I think sort of a funny video on that topic. It's actually a subtitle or a chapter in one of my little booklets. Besides the 3 books you mentioned, I also have a couple of booklets out. One of the chapters of that is, and it is focused on men, how to get the reluctant guy in your life to go to therapy. And But I think there are some particular issues I think apply to men, but I can also apply it more broadly. The general principle in answering that question, it doesn't tend to work well. Well, let me modify that. It can work fine to sort of coerce somebody into doing it. Do you know what I mean? You can say, I insist you go to therapy or I'm going to divorce you. I mean, often that's what happens. It's, that's an ultimatum, but I respect it. It's like, if that's how you feel, that kind of makes sense. But it often works better, I think, when you recognize that somebody being reluctant to go to therapy is not crazy. Somebody having misgivings, it always works better when you're working with somebody who has misgivings about something to try to understand where they're coming from. Because it's not merely being ornery, it's not merely being oppositional. It probably has a valid basis. And, when I talk about it, especially with guys, we men as a group, stereotyping somewhat, but here we are, we tend to worry that the therapy world is much more oriented toward women than toward men, because in a lot of ways it is historically.
Sure.
We worry whether the therapist is male or female. We tend to worry that, this therapist is going to side with the woman, not the man, if it's a heterosexual couple. Those aren't crazy worries. We worry that, oh my God, we're going to go to therapy and she's going to divorce me. I say again, saying she or he is going to divorce me. We have all sorts of worries, some of which maybe we don't know what they're going to be. And if somebody in your life, you want to go to therapy with them or you want to invite them to go to therapy and they're resisting, what often is the most effective thing to do is to inquire, is say, gee, tell me what's going on for you, because, I know you're not crazy. You probably have good reason for your worries. And then you see where that goes. And when you actually can recognize that, that often invites the other person to say, well, let me understand why you want me to, because maybe I don't have to be so reluctant.
Right. That's really interesting, because your advice for how to get these people to potentially go into therapy is to listen to them, to be patient, and to be considerate of their needs. And I wonder if that's just really hard, if that's the place that the relationship's in, that they're really fighting to go into therapy. I imagine that you don't pivot from having an argument for if you can go into therapy or not, and then all of a sudden there's this soft consideration for their feelings. That's a challenging road to go down. Have you seen it be helpful?
I have seen it be helpful, but your point is well taken. It's like, yeah, often when they're at that point, that's why I'm saying, well, the ultimatum approach also has its place, for someone to
Right.
say, I wish we could talk about this. Again, I can imagine even offering some understanding and still giving the ultimatum, It's like,
Right.
well, I can see why you're reluctant, but we are at a place where I don't see another way forward. And so
I
if,
heard. I was sorry. I was going to say I heard on another podcast. I was not sure where, but they say that like most couples therapy fails couples, and not because the therapy isn't helpful. It's because they go too late. Would you agree with that as well?
well, I would first quibble a little with the definition of fails.
Okay.
And actually, I do address this in my book. I think it's in the second book, in It's Not About Communication, that one. I address that issue. How do you decide whether therapy has actually been helpful or not? And folks who will say, well, I have a success rate of whatever. I'm always rather suspicious of those numbers, by the way. But if they're defining success as the couple stays together, okay, I often will tell people I have a bias in doing this work. It's a bias. It's not something that I want to impose on someone else, but I like to disclose it because my bias is toward helping people stay together if they want to.
Right.
I say that in a context where lots of couples therapists, if you really ask or observe, seem to have the opposite bias. And lots of individual therapists will have the opposite bias, where they'll say, well, if you're not happy, you should split up. And I don't come from that. Again, I keep calling it a bias because it's not determinative. It's like not up to me to tell people what to do. But that's my bias. Having said that, I've worked with lots of couples where my view of whether it was successful or not is that, oh, yeah, this clearly was successful and they split up.
Right.
Or my view is that, oh, this clearly was not terribly successful and they stayed together. Do you know what I mean? Those things aren't perfectly correlated.
Okay.
A couple stays together and is happy about it. Well, yes, that feels successful to me, certainly. But when you're doing couples therapy, there are three people involved in deciding if it's successful or not. The couple and me as the therapist, and my opinion should count the least of those three. But I've had lots of situations where we've had three separate opinions of that. Where, the one of the couple is feeling like, yeah, this is just what we need. The other couple is feeling like this is making things worse, not better. And I'm
Right.
sitting there thinking, gee, I'm not sure one way or the other.
Right.
So, that was my first answer, is to quibble a little bit with the definition of success. Now, having said the other part of what you said is so often quoted, especially from John Gottman. You've probably heard of John Gottman. And
Oh yeah, maybe that's where I've heard it.
you may have heard of, yes. He often loves to quote this particular statistic, which is, I think it's quite valid, although I've often quibbled with his particular use of this one study. He found a study. I actually looked it up. It took me a while to find it. It was a study that was done, I think somebody's master's thesis in the early 1990s. And they asked people, how long have you had this problem before you sought therapy? And the average answer, and I forgot what it was, something like 7 years, something like that.
Wow.
And so John Gottman always likes to point out, look, if you had a broken leg and you didn't show up in the emergency room until, 6 weeks later, they would be saying, well, gee, it's awfully hard to set this and make it go right. You should have come in right away, and people don't do that with couples therapy. So certainly the idea, and lots of people will tell me, because I'll often say, why are you doing this now as opposed to 6 months ago or 6 months from now? Was there some precipitating event? And many, many people will say, oh, we should have done this years ago. So that's certainly true.
Right.
That particular statistic, I think, is making an awful lot out of one little finding, and I have no idea what people would say, because sometimes you don't know. You don't realize until you realize it.
Right.
And then, with hindsight, you see you were having problems, but you may not realize it until some event happens.
Well, and I appreciate you saying about your bias that you're in there to try to help them stay together, because I know some therapists would say they're on the side of whatever is right for the couple, for even if they need to split up or whatever. But I completely see your bias as well, being like, well, they came here because they want to solve a problem, so I'm going to be on the side of helping them stay together. So what happens and maybe if it helps to use some of those Gottman's those four horsemen or whatever. What do you see in therapy over time with couples where that bias changes and you're like, oh shit, they should probably split up?
I I try not to go there even in my own mind, what they should or shouldn't do. It's very,
Okay.
very rare. I mean, in 30 years, how many times have I seen, fewer than a handful of times, where I have thought, oh my God, well, actually, I brought it up with them. Oh my God, you guys shouldn't be in the same room, never mind in the same house. And then, because it's been dangerous, and I've had that.
Yeah.
And of course, in those circumstances, I won't do couples therapy with them. It's usually
Okay.
when there's continuing violence. And
Right.
I remember one couple I worked with and they're both lying about it to their individual therapists too. There was continuing violence. There was a restraining order that they were violating by showing up in my office, and I wouldn't continue to work with them. And that's a rare circumstance. The other ones, I long since figured out. I mean, before my career as a psychologist, way back when, I used to be a statistician back in the day. I was my original degree in psychology actually was on the research side, and I was focusing on methodology and statistics. So actually, my first book in 1986, that's how far back we're going, was a statistics textbook. You can still get it on Amazon. It's sort of hilarious. It came with a 5.25-inch floppy disk in the cover,
Oh my God.
of software that I wrote for it. Anyway, my old statistical brain tells me, I think my guesses as to whether a couple's going to stay together or not are probably worse than chance. I'm often surprised. Like a couple, I'm thinking, oh my God, how are these people going to stay together? And they do. Or a couple that
Right.
seems like, oh, you guys are doing fine, and then they split up. And so I don't make those sorts of assumptions. And
Wow.
in terms of what you said about my bias, again, my bias is toward helping them stay together if they want to. But I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with the notion of, no, my work is to do what works best for them.
That's so great that you took notice of that, and seeing that like people that seem like they're in a good relationship and they pull the trigger to get out of it, and other people that are miserable end up staying together. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there's like all sorts of reasons why. Because the way, I don't know, there's definitely no statistics on it, but just from looking around and things I've read, it seems like obviously half of couples get divorced in the West. Some countries are way higher. I think Spain
A
is
little
through
under that
through
now, by the
through
way,
the
but
roof. Is
closer
okay.
to
So
41, 42%, I think, something like that.
okay, and then I would let's be generous and say 60% of
Mm-hmm.
people are staying married. I would say half of them probably shouldn't be together, and then
Mm-hmm.
the other half are actually in great marriages. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's pretty interesting that you see that like there's no rhyme or reason for people that are coming to you, because they're playing out their own family dynamics and whatever they need to heal or sort out. So I really like that. And so I wanted to get into something I read about you, saying that, let me see if I find the quote. Is on the lines of, you said that most relationship problems are not about communication, and I found that fascinating, because most
Yeah.
things I've read on couples communications, relationships, etc., always say that good communication or open communication is the most important part of a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So can you walk me through why you think most relationship problems are not about
Yeah,
communication?
yeah. And of course, that was my rather snarky title to that second book. It's not about communication, why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong,
Okay.
And so, yeah, I want to explain both parts of that. Yeah, the reason I say it's not about communication, what you pointed out is absolutely true. That in couples that are functioning well, and this is John Gottman's research, which is, incredibly valuable. His research shows that if you look at couples who are functioning well and function well over the long haul. And, Gottman's famous research is where he looked at newlyweds and then followed them for decades. And so he
Yeah.
went back and looked at the newlywed conversations, often a conversation about, talk about something you disagree about. And he would look at that. And based on a snippet of video, he could predict whether they're going to stay together. Will they still be together in 6 years or not? So what was he seeing there? What he was seeing was couples that do well show all kinds of good communication. Now, what do we mean by good communication? They're respectful. They're curious. They actually care to hear another point of view, even if it disagrees with their own. They're not yelling at each other and calling each other names. The four horsemen you mentioned, they're not showing much of that. What
Right.
is it? Criticism, contempt,
Uh,
defensiveness, and stonewalling. I think those are the four, as I recall.
got it. Got it. I'm
Yeah.
getting better at naming them.
Yeah, I think he came up. One of his books, he came up with the fifth too, but I don't remember. Whatever. The
Yeah.
point being, but of course that doesn't fit with the four horsemen image. But all of that stuff is absolutely true. That good couples that are doing well are communicating well. The fallacy is, and Gottman himself actually points this out in one of his books. I really enjoyed seeing that. The fallacy is, and here I have to get all nerdy and quoted in Latin, is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Now, what does that mean? The afterward, therefore, because of fallacy. When you observe that couples who are doing well are communicating well, and you observe the couples that are doing badly are communicating badly, the temptation is to say, if we teach the couples who are communicating badly to communicate well, they will then do well.
Right.
That's the fallacy. And my little analogy I think I used in the book is, if you look at how, Rafa plays tennis, and
Oh, I'm listening. Bring it on. Big tennis fan over here.
You're in Barcelona at the moment, aren't you? That's right.
Yeah. I try to play
Rafa.
a few times a week. I've become a gigantic tennis fan.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent. Well, then you know better than I do. But you know how some of the great players like Rafa, they grunt loudly when they hit the ball.
Right.
And most of them do it. So I guess if I want to play like Rafa, all I have to do is learn how to grunt. And then I'm going to play like Rafa. Well, no, it turns out, go figure, turns out that's not true. And the funny thing is, the reason I like that analogy is, there are probably aspects of his grunting that are very correlated with aspects of why he's so great. But they're not the same. Teaching grunting will not get you anywhere. You have to actually be behaving like a great tennis player, and then you might find you're grunting. Or maybe not. Who knows? But it's not the grunting. It's not it's not good communication that makes a good couple. It's a good couple that communicates well. That the stuff that teaching a couple to imitate couples who are doing well won't necessarily make them do well, because, and this is what I point out in the book, the reason I say it's not about communication, which, look, I recognize it's silly. Couples come to me and they're saying we need to communicate better. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not saying, oh, you're wrong. I'm saying we could work on your communication skills. We could teach you, nonviolent communication. There's a whole thing about that. Lovely stuff, by the way. We could teach you active listening. We could teach you I statements, all that stuff that people talk about when they teach communication skills.
Right.
And none of that will help you, because unless, in a very limited circumstance, I'll get into just briefly in a second, unless you're in a very limited set of people, you are actually communicating very effectively. The problem isn't that you lack communication skill. The problem is what you are communicating. You are effectively communicating anger, contempt, like the Four Horsemen. You're communicating things that are not terribly helpful to your relationship, but you're genuinely effectively communicating them. So teaching you how to communicate is not the issue. You need to look at what you're communicating, and that's based on, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What is your understanding of what's actually going on? What assumptions are you making that maybe you need to question? That's very different from communication skills. And so if you spend all your time teaching people to do I statements, or to do active listening, or to exchange a token about who gets to talk when, that's all very nice, but it won't help them. It's just wasting time figuring out what they're really pissed about.
It's so absurd that we do not teach these things at the elementary and high school level. Like, it makes me crazy. I mean, like, we barely even I don't think we even teach like basic personal finance. But we're teaching so many other classes for things that people aren't using. But if we would teach like the basics of communication and listening and curiosity, and starting in first grade or fourth grade, then how does that not impact how everyone communicates with each other moving forward for the rest of their lives? Is this not being discussed anywhere? I mean, it's crazy.
I think it is. I mean, if you look at a bunch of 5-year-olds, they tend to be a curious lot.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I'm thinking about my grandchildren. I have grandchildren. Actually, my oldest grandchild's about to turn 10 this week, and the youngest is 2. And spread out over 3 different families, we have 6 grandchildren. And delightful, I have to say. I'm a grandfather crowing about my grandchildren, or as we would say in Yiddish, kvelling. I'm kvelling about my grandchildren. But in any case, that phenomenon, it's not so much teaching communication, what you said about curiosity. If we foster curiosity, the communication stuff's going to more or less take care of itself. Where you run into, I mentioned there's some exceptions, where you run into situations where you actually need to teach communication skills, basically 2. One of them is if somebody is somewhere on the autistic spectrum. Because with folks on the autistic spectrum, often one of the things that makes them be on the spectrum, or that defines them as on the spectrum, is like what we used to call Asperger's before they changed the diagnostic categories. Folks who have a difficulty sensing whether the person they're talking to is pissed off or happy or sad or whatever. If they're not good at that stuff, they need to actually learn some communication skills so that they're not inadvertently communicating something that's going to get them in trouble. So that's
Right.
communication. And then the other one's even simpler. I have worked with couples that literally do not speak the same language.
Right.
They got together, they were really attracted, but, of course, if they're talking with me, at least one of them speaks English. The other one may speak very limited English, and the other one may not speak their language very well, and they have a communication issue. And that you learn that by getting better at the language.
Oh, I'm dealing with that dating in Barcelona. Like
Ah,
I've been out on plenty of dates with people who seem very nice, very smart, but I realized quite quickly that there is such a communication barrier that half of the relationship is going to end up being like lost in translation.
yeah,
Or I've even had people that their grasp of discussing in English things are pretty good, but they think their grasp of English is way better than it is.
yeah,
and,
yeah. That
and
can
so
come
there's
up. Yeah,
so there's always like big communication misunderstandings, and so I've definitely realized that like I certainly need someone that speaks enough English to make it like a no, not a simple barrier to what do you want to eat
hmm
tonight.
or
for
if you could get
example.
your Spanish to the point where you'd be like really idiomatic in Spanish, and of course, even
Totally.
then there are the cultural things to be bridged, which are
Yeah.
always interesting, and some of that causes communication issues too. Different assumptions about what something means. A nice example of that one is interrupting. The concept of interrupting. In some cultures, interrupting is extremely impolite.
Yeah.
And in other cultures, and Deborah Tannen, does that name ring a bell?
No.
She wrote a book, probably 30 years ago. I think it's called "You Just Don't Understand: Women and Men in Communication." But she's since done a lot of other work, like cross cultures and things like that. And one of the things she points out is, in some cultures, it isn't seen as impolite; it's seen as supportive overlapping.
Right.
And if you get
Yeah.
people I'm remembering somebody told me about a meeting they were in. This was a Jewish friend of mine, an Ashkenazic Jewish, and I don't know if you know any of the stereotypes of Ashkenazic Jews, but
Not really.
everybody interrupts everybody all the time, and if you didn't, somebody would think, "What's wrong with you?" And
Right.
it's kind of classic. And so this friend of mine was at a meeting in New England, where she had just moved, and she was on a committee of some town thing in the town of New England where she lived. And she started noticing every time she started talking, everybody would stop and look at her, like as if she had just done something wrong. Well, she realized coming in on the end of what they were saying, which is a normal thing to do among Ashkenazi Jews and among lots of people in New York City, for example, whether they're Jewish or not, because that's how everybody talks
Right.
there.
Yeah, I can admit even the context of like friendships or business meetings or whatever, there's different cultures for if you can interrupt or not. I mean, I can only relate by I had a partner once who was a chronic interrupter, and it was brutal, and no amount of communication saying like, can I get a thought out? Like, can I like it didn't matter. It went on forever until we split up. Like even, and it was such a bad experience. I like now I really look for that now when
Yeah.
I'm going out with someone. Like, can I finish a full thought if it's 10 seconds long or a minute long before someone is just going to jump in, because it's really tough. But if culturally that's where you come from, someone else might be like, oh, this is just how we do it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And actually, then, well, I would speculate about this in your relationship. You can tell me if this is true or not. But a lot of times, it isn't so much the interrupting per se as the idea that you're being steered in a different direction than you wanted to go. And
Yeah, actually, thinking back, it was like someone trying to complete my sentence, and 95% of the time the sentence was wrong,
yeah,
and
exactly.
that's made me think like, okay, maybe this is not a good fit because like we're never on the same page. So
Yeah.
that's another topic in general. But
Yeah.
I sorry, I wanted to switch gears to get into the betrayal part, because
Sure.
yeah, it was so fascinating to hear the those other answers.
Actually, I want to add one thing, if I may, because
Sure.
I said I wanted to explain that snarky subtitle of that same book. It's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. That's pretty
Okay.
snarky. Let's face it. The whole
It's
title
clickbait.
is
It's
pretty
clickbait.
snarky.
All right.
I'm sorry. Say again.
It's clickbait, they call it.
Yes, it
So
is.
it's
It is
yeah,
utterly. I admit it is clickbait. Totally.
it's bookstore clickbait.
Yes. Having said that, I point out, and this is a spoiler alert for people who want to get that book. I point out in one of the latter chapters That applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong also. Which is to say, I'm not claiming I have no good ideas. Why am I writing books if I don't think I have good ideas? Of course, I think I have good ideas. What I'm claiming is it's not so much the ideas, it's the ideology. In other words, if I start thinking I know, I'm not listening anymore. I'm defending.
Amazing.
And that happens in relationships, and it happens in therapy. If I as the therapist start thinking I know what's up with this couple, see, that's why I say I'm reluctant to even predict how they're going to do. If I start thinking I know better than they do, I'm going to be useless to them because I'll be defending my ideas instead of actually open to hearing what's going on. I like to think I'm contributing some good ideas, but of course it's their life. They're the ones who are experts on their own lives. So I need to be open to thinking, no, I really don't know. And that's true much more generally. It's true in the domain of politics, for crying out loud. Everybody's got good ideas. And then when they harden into ideologies, they become a caricature of the good ideas. They turn horrible.
Sure.
And so what I'm saying is, no, we need to traffic in ideas, not ideologies. Because ideas open you up, ideologies shut you down. So that's where that snarky subtitle.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I like that. That little separation of ideas as well. Now, I want to get into betrayal and forgiveness because I imagine the bulk of what you see with your clients, when you talk about betrayal, I think we mostly think about cheating, either emotional or physical, etc. But are there other common types of betrayal that you see in your practices that can really fracture a relationship?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And in the book, Betrayal and Forgiveness, I have 12 example, I call them couples, but they're not all actually married or intimate couples, because some of them, in one case, it's a brother and sister. In one case, it's a daughter and father, all adults. But, so there's any kind of relationship, any kind of close relationship can involve the possibility of betrayal. So absolutely the most common one I see, because I work with couples, so the most common, mostly like married couples or partnered couples, the most common one I see is infidelity, for sure. And I did kind of a seat of the pants guess, like what proportion of the couples that I see in the first session are dealing with infidelity, and it's not too much under half. Maybe 50%, whatever it is, 40. I don't know. I didn't actually count, but it's a substantial proportion. But there's other kinds of betrayal, even in a married couple. There's other kinds of betrayal. And there's other kinds of betrayal in other sorts of relationships. The one I gave that was involved a adult daughter and her father was one where we actually got this one from one of our podcast guests who had experienced this. She wrote about it in the New York Times, and then we interviewed her on our podcast. She'd been disinherited by her father completely unexpectedly. Her father died suddenly. Hadn't been sick or something, so he hadn't had a chance to sort of prepare. And when they read the will, she had been written out of it. And she knows they had sort of a falling out some years before, but she thought it had been repaired. When probably it was, but he never got around to changing his will again. And so she was incredibly betrayed by that, and it was really difficult for her to recover from that. And so there's that one. I have an example of two very close friends who were also business partners, where one of them failed to file taxes for years. And they were both, the IRS put a lien on both of their houses, and this was totally blindsided the other person because she never mentioned it. There's that kind of betrayal as well. But indeed, many of my examples are within a intimate couple.
Okay. Well, yeah, I didn't even think about business partnerships. That's totally valid. I've seen and experienced some of those. So I guess let's default to think that the people coming to you, they want this relationship to work, be it business partners or whomever. So they're invested in not letting go of these relationships. So how do people kind of accept that this betrayal is part of their life now, and then move on to create trust again, and also to heal those feelings? I mean, I interviewed someone that wrote a book on forgiveness. And she was saying things like, you have to write down. It was really interesting, like 1 to 10, and 10s just don't need to be forgiven. She goes, we don't need to forgive everybody in our life, but we can work on forgiving the other parts if we want to. So where do you even start?
Yeah. Well, the way you even asked the question, you kind of laid it out. It's like, you could have written my book,
Right.
The first thing you said, you said acceptance. Do you know what I mean? Just to accept that it happened is often incredibly difficult because, when it's something that somebody's like blindsided by, let's take infidelity because it's such a common example, and somebody finds out their partner cheated, had no idea, in many cases, had no idea there was even anything wrong in the relationship.
Right.
They said this just came out of the blue. It's like, how could this have happened? They're totally blindsided. Part of them is in denial. I mean, they have a hard time accepting it. I love to cite the work of Jill Bolte Taylor. Does that name ring a bell for you? She's a neuroscientist. You may actually recognize the name of her most famous TED Talk that she gave, which is called My Stroke of Insight. She's a neuroscientist who had a stroke in her 30s. She was quite young. Who better than a neuroscientist to write about having had a stroke? Once she got her left hemisphere back, because she lost the functions of her left hemisphere for years. And what she writes about is how essentially we're multiple people. We're all multiple people. So that part of somebody that goes into denial is a valid part of who we are. It's not all of who we are, but there's part of us that just doesn't want to believe it happened. A lot of what people want when they've been cheated on, a lot of what part of them wants is to go back and make it not have happened. Obviously that's impossible, but they want to make reality be different from what it was. They want to wake up from the nightmare. And so acceptance is a huge part of it. Just getting over that initial shock is a huge part of it. And then indeed, how do you get to the point of deciding, okay, what am I going to do about this relationship? How can I ever trust this person again? How can I understand that? Well, when I talk about forgiveness, and it was interesting to hear you describing the person you were, who wrote about the book on forgiveness you were talking about. The idea that you don't have to forgive everybody. I mean, I get that. Part of that depends on how you define forgiveness. And I have my favorite way of defining forgiveness, and I actually sort of defend it in the book, because it's not the only way. People use the word forgiveness, broadly speaking, in two different ways. One way to describe forgiveness, it's a very common usage, is that if I forgive somebody, I am restoring my relationship with them. If I forgive somebody who hurt me, I can say, well, I can get past that. I can say, you know what, I don't have to be angry at you anymore. I can trust you again. Let's go back to, let's move on from here. We're okay. And I think I can more or less, not have to keep bringing it up and throwing it in your face. That's a type of forgiveness. Perfectly valid use of the term, but I define forgiveness a little differently. And again, I'm not the only one who does this. I like to define forgiveness as actually having almost nothing to do with the person you're forgiving. And somebody quoted this to me. I think they might have got it from 12-Step. It's an inside job. Forgiveness is an inside job.
Okay.
And there's a quote that lots of us like to use from Anne Lamott, the novelist, where she said, to not forgive somebody, I'm sure I'm paraphrasing here, to not forgive somebody is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. Basically, forgiveness gets the poison out of you, then you can deal with the rat.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with whether the person deserves forgiveness, whether they've apologized, whether they've even accepted responsibility. Those are important things about trust. But forgiveness, you can actually forgive somebody in the way I'm defining the term. It's really forgiveness. The way I define forgiveness is essentially equivalent to processing the trauma, the way we say in psychological terms. What does it mean to process a trauma? It means it doesn't trigger you anymore. You can think about it and not freak out.
Right.
And that's what I mean by forgiveness. And I give an example in the book of somebody who forgave her ex-husband, who was unbelievably dangerous. I mean, who had put her in the hospital on multiple occasions, threatened to kill her and their children, was in jail when I never met him. I was in jail when I met her, waiting, and she was worried about his getting out.
Wow.
And she maintained a restraining order against him. And I think she kept a gun under her pillow. You know what I mean? She had no illusions about whether he was safe or not. She didn't trust him as far as she could throw him. But she said she forgave him in the sense that she didn't have to get pissed off when she thought about it anymore. She could recognize, her way of understanding it was he was crazy. I mean, he had serious issues that made him a dangerous guy. There are such people.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the important part, because I do believe I was a pretty angry 20-year-old, or in my 20s there was a kind of a little foundation of anger and anxiety that I had to work through in different ways. And so I really know that if you carry around this thing, it starts to erode different parts of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And even now, if there's someone I think about that betrayed or wronged me in a certain way, I work really hard because I can understand people like your client is an extreme and great example for that. Like that she would think like this person does not deserve forgiveness, but in your example, they also, she also doesn't deserve to have to carry around all that anger and rage
Precisely.
and et cetera like that. So I guess where does someone start if they've been betrayed or wronged or to whatever degree on the spectrum it is, where do they start to let go of that anger?
Yeah, that's well, and of course, so I have like several chapters in the book called Three Steps to Forgiveness. And, it's an artificial way of doing it, but, I like it as a way of structuring an answer to that very question. Where do you start? So the three steps. Step one is forgive yourself. And forgive yourself doesn't mean you were to blame for what happened. You know what I mean? The person who was cheated on isn't to blame for the other person cheating. The example I gave of that woman, she was not to blame for her husband being violent. I mean, this doesn't matter how annoying she was, or whatever.
Right.
That did not justify in any way his being violent. So she wasn't in any way morally responsible for what happened, but a phenomenon. And again, I get this out of my training in helping people deal with trauma. As I mentioned, it's a lot about dealing with trauma. When you're recovering from a bad thing that happened to you, we always, as a species, we tend to blame ourselves, at least in part. That explains why people who were sexually abused as young children often blame themselves. As adults, they'll think back and say, they were 3 years old and were sexually abused, for a period of several years, starting at 3. And they're thinking, oh my God, I should have stopped it. Seriously? I mean, they know better cognitively that a 3-year-old doesn't have that power. But they still blame themselves because it beats the alternative, which is to feel like the world is completely out of control, completely terrible all the time, and walking around in just abject fear all the time. If you can blame yourself, you can feel like, well, maybe I somehow caused it, and so maybe I have some control over it. It's not accurate, but it's psychologically understandable. That's why people do that. So there's always a tendency, somebody gets in a car accident that clearly wasn't their fault and they're still blaming themselves. I should have known, or, oh my God, when there's a suicide in a family and the family will often blame themselves, even though they had no way of knowing the person was going to do it. They'll look back and say, oh, I should have seen the signs, and they'll beat themselves up about it. And it's natural. It wasn't their fault, but to feel that way is a natural part of it. So how do you, go ahead.
Sorry for me. I spoken with a couple people that have went through bullying, and I had a few years of it in my early years as well. And I think it was into my late 20s that I spoke with the therapist, and she had to explain to me why that wasn't my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had, like, it wasn't something that I thought about, but like it definitely was something that impacted me in an enormous, profound way. And I remember when it took a few sessions where she had to walk me through how this was not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And when she finally, got through my thick skull or all those different layers of, I guess, trauma to that I've been going over for years, I really, like, I remember I just sat there for like 5 minutes because my whole world kind of, in a good way, had kind of flipped upside down.
Yeah.
So I can imagine it's similar in an environment where in a relationship where someone was betrayed, and I guess it's really hard to draw a line between accountability and blaming yourself.
It absolutely is, and that's an interesting line, because when you can actually, what I mean by forgiving yourself, what you were able to do, it sounds like, with respect to being bullied as a kid, what actually that means to me when I say it is you were able to look and say, wait a minute, given who I was, given what I knew and didn't know, given the power I didn't have, which is different from now as an adult. Oh my God, I was doing the best I could. Even though, with hindsight, of course, if you could have known to do something different, you would have.
Right.
But you couldn't, you weren't that person. So to accept that is what it means. And then you stop beating yourself up. It's like, oh, okay. Wait a minute. I really was doing the best I could. That is liberating as you experience. It feels like, oh, good. That feels so much better. And that's actually, that tees up very nicely step 2. Because step 2 of forgiving is to forgive the person who hurt you. And the reason I say that forgiving yourself tees that up very nicely is because basically to forgive someone who hurts you is to recognize that on some level, maybe not morally, but on some level, they were doing the best they could too. The bullies were doing the best they could. I'm not condoning bullying. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's fine that they did it or you just have to accept it. No, not at all. But I'm observing that, well, given the forces involved, given who they were, given how they viewed the world, that's what they did. And you can accept that. You don't have to fight it anymore. You can just say, well, blast, that's who they are, When somebody's cheated on you, it's like, wow, I can't condone it morally, but I can say, I can try at least understand, well, where did that come from? Because look, so many times, and look, who of us has not done something we regret doing? We've all hurt other people. We haven't all cheated on our spouses, right? But we have all hurt other people in one way or another, big or small. I'm not equating them, but I've done things and looked back and said, oh, I feel bad that I did that. I wish I hadn't done it. I wish I had known better than to do that. At the moment I did it, it's what I did. So I guess it was sort of the best I could do at that point. I know better now, so I'm pretty confident I won't do it again. If you can extend that to the person who hurt you, you can say, oh, I don't have to bother being angry at you anymore. I still don't know if I trust you. Whole different set of questions. Like I said about the woman who, she was no way trusting her ex-husband, but I don't have to bother being angry anymore. It involves finding some way of wrapping your brain around the idea that whoever this person was, that's who they were. That was the best they could do.
It's interesting because I think like conversations like this are why I think there's still a big benefit in talk therapy. Like I think recently with psychedelics and other things, we're realizing that talk therapy has a lower ceiling for efficacy than we thought in the past. And I think a lot of these different modalities will, I think, help talk therapy in the future. But it's something like this to think if someone has wronged you in such a profound way, and then you're trying to forgive, like you're trying to have empathy, like let's take the bullying. So you're going to say, you know what? I know this kid or whatever came from a really shit family. So if he's acting like that, his upbringing must have been a complete nightmare. But then there's that element of you still don't want to dismiss your own pain.
No,
because I think that's a bad habit moving forward through life. When anytime someone hurts you, you're like, oh, but something happened to them when they were younger. You're like, yeah, okay. If I go into a dark alley in whatever city and I get stabbed, it doesn't matter that the stabber had an abusive father. Like I'm still bleeding here.
Yeah. Well, and let's note, and this is such a controversial thing that comes up like on college campuses. If they're saying, let's say to a young woman on a college campus, there's some dark alleys you probably shouldn't go in. And everybody gets upset and says, oh my God, you're blaming the victim. No, you're not. But you're also recognizing, you're going to have to give some thought to the realities out there. It wouldn't be morally your fault if somebody attacked you any more than it was morally your fault to be bullied. But knowing what you now know, there's some dark alleys you should probably avoid or be well armed when you go there, Sure. And if you're not, that part's on you. That doesn't mean you're morally responsible for somebody doing something flat out immoral, but it does mean you need to use your judgment. And it's interesting because when you actually get to that place of forgiving, it doesn't make you less safe. It actually makes you think more clearly. That's why I keep going back to that example of the woman with her ex-husband. She was under, the fact that she could say, well, she could even, once she was able to forgive him, she could even remember good times she had with him because there were some good times.
Yeah, I think that's something that I learned through. And I think about this often. And so, really long story short, I did a session of MDMA assisted therapy, and through that, I was able to process the death of both my grandparents, both of which I was very, very, very close with. And in that process, I realized I got back a lot of the love that I feel like I didn't even know that I had cauterized in my mind, and all these memories started coming back. And what I had realized was that my brain somehow had a defense mechanism that to protect myself from the pain.
Of course,
it didn't just turn off the pain. It turned off all of the love and the connection and the sweetness and all of the appreciation they had for me. Like all of that, I didn't have access to anymore.
Yeah,
and I look back now,
grieving. That's right. Yeah,
totally. Or I should have been.
Or exactly. Better.
So I think about that now often. That like let's say someone goes through a traumatic relationship or just a really terrible one, and I don't think it's really hard because you don't want to lose the love that you had for that person, which,
Yep.
maybe it was the first 6 months or the first 5 years or whatever. But if the last part of that relationship was so terrible, it's like what Daniel Kahneman says, that the remembering self is a big part of the experience of the, a big part of the experience that you'll remember. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point to make, that like, even if someone hurt you, you don't want to lose the love that was still part of it, and you can still exercise your discernment around the betrayal.
Yes, precisely. And that actually seems to me, and your example is such a great one, to be able to, in effect, now I don't mean to superimpose terminology you didn't say, but it's like I can almost say you sort of forgave your grandparents for dying. Do you know what I mean? In that sense.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like,
no, that's a great analogy. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
but obviously it wasn't a moral thing, but in
Right.
terms of, well, they abandoned you, they didn't mean
No,
to.
actually, you know what? To certify your point, a friend of mine who also did psychedelic therapy around the same time as me, he came out that he had so much. His mother had died of cancer when he was young,
Mm-hmm.
and he was so angry at her
Mm-hmm.
for leaving him. And he's an adult. He's a 40-year-old successful man,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't realize that so much anger was like directly at her, because he knew like she didn't choose to have cancer, she didn't choose to leave him.
Sure.
So there was an exercising of the demons of that, like, you're just angry and you want someone to blame.
Yes. And so maybe that's a nice segue into my third step. So, step one is forgive yourself. Step two is forgive whoever hurt you, which I claim is basically understanding about them what you understand about yourself. It's like, you were doing the best you could. His understanding that his mother obviously did not intend to abandon him by dying of cancer.
Right.
And yet his anger is also understandable too, with that part of him that doesn't understand that stuff, the young parts of us all. Step three, I call it forgiving God. And you don't even have to be traditionally religious or believe in God to appreciate what I mean by forgiving God. You could say forgiving the universe if you want. Step three is forgiving the fact that this damn stuff happens. The fact that we think we have this tantalizing sense that we have some control over what happens to us and we can mostly protect ourselves. And much of the time that is true. And then some horrible thing happens and we couldn't prevent it. And, especially the ones that with hindsight, we could have prevented if we'd only known, but we didn't know, So right. Those are the things you have to be able to somehow say, this is the universe we got. And what I claim when I call it forgiving God, it's another word for that is faith. When I talk about faith, all I mean, and it's actually a pretty big meaning, is accepting that the universe is right to be what it is, that reality is right. It's not merely you have to grit your teeth and accept it. It's that there's some rightness to this whole business. How can we experience joy when we know we're all going to die? Faith is how you do that. Faith is it's not faith that, oh no, I know I'm going to live after. I don't have to have any of that. It's simply about saying there's something right about this whole universe business. It's kind of amazing. And then you can appreciate it. And then you can even appreciate that if we didn't have death, life would be meaningless. If we didn't have death, having children would be meaningless. Love would be meaningless. I mean, it's all based on the fact that we know we're finite.
And right. So, well, speaking of religion, I would add a bit of caveat to say that, like, to think that this is a practice line for for heaven or an afterlife, I think that also demeans life, because
I agree with you.
But that's another topic entirely. Something I want to say, that it's so interesting because there's somebody I spoke to recently, and they were in a relationship way too long, and they continue to blame themselves for not ending it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And we've had this conversation a couple times, and because he's like, I saw all these problems really soon, and the relationship was terrible for the whole way through, but there is something about her that I really loved. And at the end, like, he said, to process a lot of this, because I'm sure you've seen, as a relationship gets worse, everybody gets worse in it. It's not because one person or the other. It's just a dynamic that, just goes to zero.
They're bringing out the worst in each other, often.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and the answer is that you should be together. So like, how does someone forgive themselves in a scenario like that?
That's the step one. It's like,
Yeah.
it is about, for your friend, it's about his understanding that he didn't know that at the time. You know what I mean? He didn't know what he didn't know. He now knows a lot better because he has the benefit of hindsight, which is, as they say, 2020. He can see back and say, well, look at all the signs I should have seen. Well, were you supposed to be a different person? What do you mean you should have seen it? I'm trying to think. There's all kinds of things I can look back and said, I should have done that differently. Even things like, oh, I know better than that. But at the moment I didn't know better,
Yeah, these are things I have to work on as well, because that's why I can relate to him so much, because I've had similar experiences, and that's a hard one. It's just like, fuck, I saw these things in the first 3 months. Yeah. I knew this was going to be a nightmare, and I liked something, and so I thought maybe it could get better, and you're like, no, it's not going to get better. Run. So, and yeah.
My wife and I, we talk about this on our podcast. My wife's name is Judy Alexander, different last name. I only say that because my ex-wife's name is Judy Chalmer, which is sort of funny. So we all get along. But we both were in first marriages that for very different reasons didn't work. And saying nothing bad about our exes, who were fine people, but for differing reasons, which I won't bother going into, that's their privacy involved, didn't work out. And we are both so completely appreciative of each other for having found a marriage that works well. It's funny. We've joked about, I should write a book on relationships, and it's just 4 words: find the right person. Any questions? But you don't know you haven't got the right person until you know that.
Oh, that's it. It's so true, though. It is so true that so many of these dynamic problems would disappear if there's someone that is just more compatible for your type of personality as well. There really is so much of that. And so isn't I guess an answer is like, especially for meeting the right person, like you really have to do a lot of dates and be more discerning. Yeah. And it's hard to know that when you're 18 or even 30 or even 35, because you haven't seen all the different permutations of personalities.
Exactly. And look, in terms of like couples that form a life together, things happen that radically change the situation. You have kids, for example, right. you move in together, and, the sort of milestones that often happen in people's relationships, that can often bring about changes you simply have no way to anticipate until you experience them. So, you only know what you know when you know it. I mean, that's the central, what would I call it? Spiritual work, I guess, of forgiving yourself, forgiving the other, forgiving the fact, forgiving God, whatever you want to call it. The central spiritual work is all about acceptance of reality as it is. And as I say, if you add that one extra spin, it's not just accepting reality, it's accepting the rightness of it. It's like, there's something right about the fact that we couldn't figure this out until we could figure it out. Because if people were that good at discerning, who knows if, I'm sure it would have all kinds of bad effects that, there's a reason why it takes as long as it takes.
Right.
And,
and I love that line too. It takes as long as it takes. So let's review the 3 things. So it's forgive yourself.
Yep.
The universe is the third one. What's
forgive the one who hurt you, right? Forgive yourself, forgive the person who hurt you, and then forgive God, the universe, whatever you want to say.
Right. After this show, I'm going to see if I can find that person who wrote the book on forgiveness, because she has some ideas that I think you would really like. That they're more like esoteric, spiritual, where she's like, forgive all of 1978 if you need to. Forgive the energy around that person.
Absolutely.
Forgive the house that this should happen into. And she says it becomes a practice of forgiveness, because if you're not ready to forgive that person, forgive the car they drove when they yelled at you at that time, or all those things. And I found that
I like that.
Really, really great.
That's all about acceptance. It's all about that sense of, that's my one word for all of that is faith. That's what I mean by faith. It's just sort of saying, forgive the universe for being what it is. It has reasons. It has reasons that are way beyond any individual. We're in the middle of it. We can't comprehend all of it. We're in the middle of it.
Oh,
So
that's a hard. It's a hard sell for me to go down the road with it. Everything happens for a reason. That's a hard one for
I
me.
so avoid that phrase. I will tell you, I avoid that phrase.
I heard it in the tone,
Oh
but
God, yeah. Well, I
no, I know
apologies
no I
for your even hearing that. No, because I do avoid. I'll tell you, I even comment this on somewhere in I think in my most recent book, because when you say that to somebody who's hurting, it's incredibly unempathic. I mean,
right.
sure, I'll agree. Everything happens for a reason. What does that mean? But it may happen for reasons that are way more complex than any human being could possibly comprehend. You know, chaotic systems, mathematically speaking, chaotic systems
Mm,
are so turned back on each other, you can't possibly anticipate. No human being can anticipate exactly what's going to happen. You just
right.
can't. So it's way more complex than we can possibly understand. So sure, everything happens for a reason, but sometimes we have no clue what that reason is. A tiny change in initial conditions brought about a completely different result. There's
Right.
no way to predict that. So that's why I avoid saying, oh, everything happens for a reason, as if that's supposed to be reassuring. It's like
Yeah.
everything's random. You're screwed. You're basically fucked. What else is new? That's not a message I really want to convey to people, because I actually say, no, somehow it's livable, even though it's often painful and difficult. And that seems to be part of the territory.
Yeah, and yeah, I can see why it's number three. I guess
Yes.
moving on from that. So I guess if someone has gone through that idea and they're doing their best to take your 3 steps at forgiveness and moving on, how does someone, friendship, spouse, family members, etc., how do you begin to regain trust
Yes.
so that relationship can get better again?
Yeah. And that is, of course, exactly. That's the next thing to consider. And you can't, I talked about forgiveness being an inside job. It's like, no, that's your own personal work. You got to figure that one out. But trust involves both parties. And interestingly, what I claim is trust involves both parties. And it's not just about the person who was cheated on learning to trust the cheater. It's actually about the cheater also learning to trust the one who was cheated on, which sounds like, well, what do they get any consideration for? They're the ones who, did the bad thing. Well, that's true. But probably, this wouldn't be terribly surprising, when somebody's been cheated on, their reaction wasn't exactly kind, usually. And again, I'm not saying it isn't deserved. I understand why getting like super pissed off and, being quite mean to the person who cheated on you is a totally understandable response. I'm just observing that they're going to have a hard time trusting you too. So
Right.
that ends up being working both ways. And the way you can possibly develop trust, and sometimes what you encounter there is deal breakers. It's like, oh my God, I see the problem here. And I've met a handful of people over the years where it seems like, wow, the problem here isn't that there's fundamentally anything wrong in the relationship. The problem is that this one particular person just really isn't wired for monogamy. They just don't want to be able to, they want to offer that commitment, but they can't seem to pull it off because they
Right.
just don't seem to be wired that way. The sort of guys I've met where if they were in, let's say, Saudi Arabia, they'd have 5 wives and be nice to all of them. They really love women, but not just one at a time.
Right.
Occasionally, I don't mean to be too simplistic, but occasionally I'll see that. And that's like a deal breaker. It's like, well, if what you want is monogamy, you're probably not going to get that from this person. So, either renegotiate that or figure it out. But
Right.
if what you're looking is a trust again, where you both agreed on what it is you're trusting each other about, that's something that you have to be able to understand what happened, develop some kind of narrative that feels right to you, so you can wrap your brain around the idea that this person who hurt me has now grown. We have a couple have now grown so that we now know what to do rather than that happen again. Do you know what I mean? We now have knowledge we didn't have before, because we all have that experience. I don't know if you remember as a little kid learning how to read, but once you know how to read a given language, you can't not read.
Mm,
Do you know what I mean? It's like, I mean,
sure.
I can look at a language I have no idea how to look at the orthography, and I can see that. And if they ask me what color are those letters, I could tell you. But that little experiment they do, well, they'll have the word red except the ink is green, and they'll ask you
Oh,
what color is that word, and you'll hesitate
yeah.
before you say green.
Hmm.
It's that you can't, once you've learned some stuff, you can't unlearn it. And it's that kind of growth that when you experience that, it's like, oh, well, we're not going to get into that place that led to the affair, because look how much we've grown. We have learned so much. Our intimacy is at such a better level. I know that rather than cheating, we would be talking about it. Now,
Right.
can you know that for 100% sure? No, of course not. But you can develop that sense of, oh, we know how to handle this now, and we've been through something really hard and come through it, and that can be very reassuring. So that's what the process of building trust is about.
Okay.
And it's hard. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's
Yeah. Well, and I guess the person that was let's just use the typical cheating. Someone was cheated on, then maybe they have then established that red line in their head that if this happens again, this relationship's officially over.
mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's a different thing to be like maybe they accept that their partner is just going to do these things and they'll turn their eye to a couple of them. And I think growing up, I grew up Catholic, and I think I was much more dogmatic with these ideas, that like no one gets divorced or all of these things. Whereas now, the people I've met, the people I've spoken to, etc., you just see that like there are so many permutations from how people are going to live their life, and how they're going to live them as a couple is completely different. And considering, like we just said at the top of the show, that only maybe 20-30% of married couples that stay together are actually happy, I would say do whatever the hell you got to do. As long as it's working for you and both people feel like heard, respected, and you're content in your life, who gives a shit what the recipe is. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because that phenomenon, like what do you do if somebody cheats again or something? What I find interesting is that indeed somebody might feel like, well, all right, if it happened again, I'm very likely to split up. But those same people, and I'll often note this with them, those same people are sitting in my office saying, oh my God, if 6 months ago, if you had asked me, would I stay with my partner if I'd learned he cheated? I would never have. I would have said immediately, of course not. And here I am in your office trying to figure out how to save this. So nobody can predict exactly what would happen until it happens. The thing that they learn from going through the crisis is, we don't know exactly how we'll handle it, but you know what? I'll bet we can handle it, or I'll bet I can handle it. If somebody betrays me again and I realize, okay, I can't trust them anymore, I now have some confidence that I will be able to handle that. It won't be easy, but I know I'll be able to handle it, and then I don't have to freak out. And that, of course, bodes well for the relationship because then you can talk about stuff. If you're not in freak out mode.
Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do have one last question that I saw on your profile that I wanted to ask you, because I've done a fair bit of improv in my life. I did it through university and a little bit here in Barcelona and Toronto, and I read that you describe couples therapy as akin to improv theater, and so I'd love to know. I have my ideas for why it might be, but what do you think?
Yeah. I had fun with that. That was a chapter that in that book. It's not about communication, actually. I have a whole chapter on how I view what the process of therapy is. The reason I say it's like improv, the first session is sort of like, how when you do improv, and you've already told me you've done a lot more than I have. I've played with it once or twice, but you've actually done a lot. I have actually several of our kids were heavily into theater, and they did a lot of improv. So I learned about it that way. Any improv, sketch has to start with some kind of setup. There's a premise that you start with, and then you play with it. And then from that point on, it's all yes and, right? That's the one rule of improv, as I understand it, is yes and, which is to say, anything somebody throws at you, you don't say, no, we're not going that way, we're going this way. You don't deny it. You say, absolutely. And then you add something maybe even sillier to that. Who knows? And that's what makes it funny or not, but that's how it goes. When you start off in couples therapy, the first session is basically the premise. I explain to people my favorite way of structuring things, thinking about stability and intimacy as both being important, and they involve different needs and different skills. I have a lot of stuff I like to cover in the first session. I do a family diagram, I get a lot of background information. But then once we get going into whatever it is that they're there to try and figure out, it's much more like improv, where the job of the therapist initially is to be probably the only one in the room who's capable of being yes and. Because I'll hear whatever I hear, and I will assume, the way you do an improv, I will assume whatever it is meaningful. It may sound like, wow, the other person's saying the opposite of that, but each person is saying something that's their understanding at the moment. Let's follow that up. It starts with that basic assumption that neither one of them is crazy. They're probably not crazy. It's every once in a great while I'll meet a couple where somebody is like having a psychotic break or something. All right, they're crazy.
Right.
But usually they're not. They're not crazy. They may be hurt and angry and all sorts of things, but they're not nuts. So if they have an understanding, it's based on something. And that's the sense in which, so I kind of go with it. And the more I'm able to invite them into that stance of yes and, it's like, oh, they get to what I love to call the oh shit moment. And what do I mean by the oh shit moment? The oh shit moment is, and I'm dramatizing it, it's not really a moment, but the oh shit understanding. And the reason I call it the oh shit rather than aha is it's not necessarily a great relief. But the oh shit understanding is when you get to that point of saying, oh shit, no wonder we're having this issue. I see how you believe what you're believing there. It makes sense to me. I also see how I believe what I'm believing. No wonder we're having this problem. And they're not squabbling at that point. They're actually in this mode of, oh shit, we've understood something. Now what do we do? That's why it's not an aha moment. An aha moment is like, oh good, we've got it solved. This is more like, oh shit, that's why we're having this problem. And then you can work with it because neither person is in freak out mode at that moment. They're thinking, oh shit, now I wonder if there's a way through this. And when they can get to there and not have any foregone conclusions about, oh, that means we have to split up or that means we can stay together, whatever. If they just get to that place and say, wow, where does this go? Then they can actually hear themselves in each other. And that's when transformation happens.
That's great because the yes and there's an exercise improv actually that anyone sitting in a group can try it. You can just start a story in the group. Someone starts it. I'm in a parking lot, whatever. Blah blah blah, and then you say, and the next person has to start with yes. And I was sitting in a Corvette, and you go all the way around the circle, and when you get back to the initial person, you find you've had an interesting story. It might not be funny or factual or but it's interesting, and if you do that same exercise, but every person goes no but, and then they start the sentence, it's chaotic. It doesn't make any sense. There's obviously no flow.
It's
like
dead.
you kind of don't even want to go the full way around the circle because it's such a mess.
Yeah.
And so I imagine you probably see some therapeutic version of that with some of your couples where one of the partners is kind of immovable and they're unwilling to take okay, yes, and you feel hurt because of this. They're like, well, no, you shouldn't feel like that.
Exactly.
And I can imagine your face is like, you probably have an oh shit moment when you see that because you're like, this is going to be a tough couple.
Yeah, well, my job is even to understand where they're coming from, that they're in such a closed position, which they often, it's amazing what offering understanding can often do, not always, I get that, but often can do of sort of softening someone's categories, It is interesting. I actually participated in, I think we even had a podcast guest we did this with, where it's a version of that story where you add one word. So you just go around the room and each person adds literally just one word, sometimes and or the, but it makes for a very interesting story because it's completely unpredictable. You never know, it's no story that any individual in there would have come up with on their own.
Yeah. A lot of those improv games are really great.
And
so,
see, that's what therapy is. A conversation with a therapist. And well, it was always funny back in the days when I used to accept insurance. And one of the things insurance companies often want you to do is a treatment plan. And I would say, well, the only problem with doing a treatment plan for couples therapy is it's not treatment and it's not planned. Anything other than that, it's fine. Sure, I can do a treatment plan. If treatment plan is we'll have these conversations and I hope it makes them better. I mean, that's not going to convince an insurance company very much. I understand that. But it's not about that. It's much more about the sense of a conversation that none of us, including me, would have thought of until we all participated in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Collaboration, I think, is the biggest part. If there's one part of the equation, like again, in any, I'm not just talking marriage or romantic relationship, any relationship. Mm-hmm. If one person is saying, I feel hurt because you've done this to me, and the other person's like, well, you shouldn't feel like that. Then like it's kind of going to go nowhere. And I think that's I think some friendships can, I think some people are better off moving on from some friendships. And I think romantic relationships are the same, but, anyhow, thank you very much for being here. I really enjoyed all your perspectives on, especially getting someone to therapy who doesn't want to go, and then getting into betrayal and rebuilding trust. Some of which I'm definitely gonna journal about tomorrow for some things that I want to forgive and move on from, and I think that'll help. So I appreciate your time and being here. And so how can people where can they find you?
So my own website and my practice website, it also has information about other stuff too, is brucechalmer.com. They just go to brucechalmer.com. They'll see that I've got links there to my books and stuff like that. I have a Facebook page. I think it's Dr. Bruce Chalmer on Facebook. Just Dr. Bruce Chalmer, no period in there. And also have the podcast that I mentioned that I do with my wife is called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. The 7 words being be kind, don't panic, and have faith. Anyway, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. If you go to ctin7, the number 7.com, that's our podcast website, or you can just Google Couples Therapy in 7 Words and you'll find us. And that's where they can get all of our podcast episodes and also more information. And my books are available anywhere books are sold. And I always love to hear from people, and you can contact me through either of those websites as well.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks very much again for your time today and being here.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this.
It says it's stopping, but
it says 99% uploading, so it looks like I'm almost all uploaded.
Yeah, this is a first. Normally you press stop and it's stopped. So I don't know.
That's odd.
I need to. Yeah, let me try to.
It's probably AI. It's taken over. It's decided, we're not done with this conversation yet. So.
It wants to know something specifically. What the hell? Let me try to reload the page. Hopefully that helps. I just don't want to. If I lose this conversation, I'm going to be pissed. Yeah. All right. Let me try to refresh.
It's still saying recording. It's very odd. Yeah, mine says 99%, but it's still recording, which is probably why it's not 100%, because while it's still recording, it can't get to 100%. Is there anything I can do on my end to stop it from recording? I doubt it, but no, I don't have a... Chrome, yeah. Okay. Reload site, changes may not be saved. That's okay. I should do that. Yeah. And it's warning me, saying changes you made may not be. Yeah. Okay.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you did enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.